Hello everyone, this is Mel here from Origins. As you can see, there are multiple channels which you can sign up to. The Odyssey channel is where you'll find all the old videos, so if you're not aware of that, please feel free to go there. This is from Binesh in India, the material that I'm going to be looking at today. Thank you, Binesh, for spotting what follows. If you've been looking at the videos over the last few months, in fact over the past year really, you will have noticed that evidence has cropped up that would suggest that the hadiths are from much later than we could have expected. We're talking the 14th, 15th, 16th century, essentially the Ottoman times. This showed itself when we looked at the artwork in relation to Muhammad, and we saw a definite progression from an earlier period where Muhammad was depicted without any problem to a much later period starting in the 1500s when suddenly Muhammad has been veiled. And yet there were hadiths that supposedly come from the 7th century where Muhammad was suggesting that you mustn't draw him or people or animals and all that kind of stuff. So there was a contradiction there. We also saw another piece of evidence for that, which was in relation to the tombs. So there was a hadith which basically said that Muslims are not to pray towards a tomb or a grave, and yet there was a 1,000-year history of people doing just that, visiting the supposed grave of Muhammad and all of the other personalities. Whether those graves are real or not is another question. And visiting them in Medina for 1,000 years, building mausoleums and so forth. And there was witness accounts of the fact that they prayed towards Muhammad and asked for his intercession, which would contradict again the hadiths, which would suggest that the hadiths are part of a much later agenda. Now, so this is in the same light. So what's of interest to us again is the fact that there's evidence here that would suggest the hadiths, this particular hadith is late, but also a suggestion that the inspiration for the hadith was from a Hindu source, which is not really what you'd expect for a monotheistic religion like Islam, or at least a religion that supposes to be monotheistic. So, without further ado, evidence that Islam borrows directly from beliefs in the Hindu caste system. So this is a hadith from Mishkat al-Masabi 119, book 1, hadith 112. Okay, so there's the Arabic if you want to read the original. And here it is up close. Abu Darda reported God's messenger as saying, God created Adam when he created him and struck his right shoulder and brought forth his offspring, white like small ants. And he struck his left shoulder and brought forth his offspring, black as though they were charcoal. Then he said to the party on his right side, to paradise, and I do not care. And he said to the party to his left shoulder, to hell, and I do not care. Ahmad transmitted it. Okay, so we can see this idea of being those on the right going to heaven and those on the left going to hell having a gospel basis, but this idea of striking the shoulder and offspring coming from that is very strange, and there doesn't seem to be any obvious source in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And this is where Binesh comes in handy. He says, when I read this verse carefully, it is similar to that of the Hindu concept of how different caste system was formed. Since I am living in India, I know how the caste system works here. To explain you very shortly, this is what many hardcore upper caste Hindus believe. Brahmins are considered as upper caste Hindus who think they are superior. Brahmins who were mainly teachers and intellectuals and are believed to have come from Brahma's head. Then came the Kshatriyas, and I'm sorry if I can't pronounce it correctly, or the warriors and rulers, supposedly from his arms. The third slot went to the Vaishyas, or the traders, who were created from his thighs. At the bottom of the heap were the Shudras, who came from Brahma's feet and did all the menial jobs. And there's a depiction of it there. Okay, so the warriors and rulers come from the arms, essentially, which is reminiscent of that hadith that we just saw a second ago. He goes on to say, I'm extremely surprised at the similarity of the concept, although there are differences in how the story was made by Muhammad through his interpretation using Adam and his God. Now, where I would differ on this is I don't think Muhammad had anything to do with this, as I'll explain later, but nonetheless, he says, you can easily find the similarities and differences by reading the article and Islamic sources where I have attached. I also confirmed it with one of my Brahmin friend. He also agreed with me that the hadith verse looks similar to that of his Brahmin concept of how different caste people were created. He goes on to say, I know that India's famous madrasa is located in Uttar Pradesh, which is northern part of India. The seminary name is Darul Uloom Deoband. This is one of the oldest. Now, I've had a look into this to try and see where it was most likely this hadith is most likely to have come from, and I think this might be probably the best likelihood of it. So I just got this from Wikipedia. This is publicly available information. Presumably it's trustworthy, but you know, it's pretty common information, so it should be okay, I think. Orders of Sufis became important in India during the 13th century, following the ministry of Mu'nuddin Chisti, 1142 to 1236, who settled in Ajmer and attracted large numbers of converts to Islam because of his holiness. His Chisti order went on to become the most influential Sufi lineage in India, although other orders from Central Asia and Southwest Asia also reached India and played a major role in the spread of Islam. Now, considering that this order was the most influential and attracted large numbers of converts, I think this is a good starting point in terms of thinking about where the hadith was written and by whom. I think this would be my first suspect in determining where this hadith came from. It goes on to say that in this way they created a large literature in regional languages that embedded Islamic culture deeply into older South Asian traditions. So there was obviously an attempt to take Islamic ideas, merge them with Hindu ideas to make it more palatable and to attract large numbers of converts. They obviously weren't particularly interested in the question of whether what they were doing is true or not. They were more concerned about converting people. So I think this is probably where the hadith came from. These are sort of spiritual ideas here. This idea, you know, fits in with, let's just go back a second. You know, this idea that you have the Brahma and the Kshatriya and the Vaishya and so forth, all associated with different parts of the body. The only thing that they did differently was to say that the right side is where the white offspring came from and the left side is where the black offspring. And there's also obvious racial elements to that, of course. So my instinct says that when Hindus converted to Islam, especially in the Sufi orders, they brought with them their old Hindu concepts, and these got incorporated into these hadiths. As a result, I would date this hadith as no earlier than the 13th century AD. It obviously could have been written later than that, but I would say that that's a good starting point. This corresponds to a growing body of evidence that some hadiths are from a much later period in Islamic history, and claims that they come from 7th century through chains of narration are bogus.